The 9 p.m. edict, Stilgherrian, welcome to the show.
Hi there, Mark.
And from CNet Australia, the news editor, Claire Reilly, welcome.
Good to be here. I feel a little bad that I don't have 7 podcasts as well.
Well, you can add this one to your list as well.
Yeah,
I think you're on enough.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah.
Now, Gamergate is one of those things that seems to... Controversy just seems to follow this term. It's highly misunderstood, it's hugely debated, and of course, one of the hardest things about Gamergate is that no one can actually agree what the debate actually is. So we're going to navigate this step by step to see if we can make sense of it. Now, it started around about a month ago. This very angry guy posted, I would say, demonstrably false allegations about his ex-girlfriend, claiming that she slept with a video game site reviewer for better scores for her games. Pick up the story for us, Claire.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, this whole situation is just a cluster bomb of terrible. But basically, it started out, the jilted ex comes in and says, you know, you're sleeping with people for better reviews. It opens up this whole can of worms around are gaming journalists too closely tied to the devs and the creators of games. It also kind of snowballed in with a video game critic and commenter, Anita Sarkeesian, and she has a really popular video series called Tropes versus Women in Video Games. And she essentially discusses, I mean, if you've played a game like Grand Theft Auto or some of these games that are really like, hey, ladies exist in this game to be non-playable bikini-wearing characters.
Or permanent victims that you save as well.
Absolutely. You know, bash someone up, throw them in the boot of your car. She sort of just questions this and says, this isn't a good example to have in games. So she's sort of been thrown into the whole Gamergate thing as well. Essentially, I mean, it's so amorphous, it's so big, but to ring it in, it's largely about ethics and journalism. Now, that's what the Gamergate, people who are self-identify with this movement on Twitter and on Reddit and on 4chan, they say it's about ethics in gaming journalism. So questioning, okay, well, how close are the journos getting to these devs? It's then kind of blown into this bizarrely misogynistic movement. Now, not all people, not all men, not all Gamergaters, but that's how the movement's been identified, as this misogynistic group of people that are threatening critics, saying, you know, we'll scare you out of your house, you know, you're not going to be able to speak at the University of Utah because
Which is what's happened with Anita Sarkeesian.
Yeah.
Well, I was about to say, we haven't really emphasised how severe this harassment has been. It's not just threats of harassment, it is actual harassment.
And disgusting rape threats and death
personal
threats. And
photos posted online, the so-called doxing, when your private documents are thrown out there into the world.
Like your address and things. And these people try and keep their information private because they don't want... It's not saying that people that dox them are going to do something harmful, but if your information's out there and you're a public figure, it's pretty terrifying if someone who is a bit unhinged might come to your house one day and have a problem with it.
We've even seen that in Australia, where an iOS developer in Tasmania waded into this debate, and then the feral goldfish of Gamergate, by which I mean that really quite small subset of people who get into the operations of harassing people, are swarming out to find out his home address, telling him they know his home address, and I find it fascinating because it's incredibly loud, incredibly violent in its language, harassing in its actions, and yet it is such a tiny group of people. It's been estimated it's about 10,000 people are talking about this at all out of 6 million on Reddit, and that really is out of probably 500 million people on the planet who play games, because we've got 2 billion people on this internet thing now, and 3 billion.
This is what I find fascinating about this. In any other art form, the kind of criticism that Anita Sarkeesian was directing at, if she directed it at film, if she directed it at books, there wouldn't have been this reaction. Why was there such a huge, vicious, almost personal offence taken by this particular subset of the gaming audience?
Okay, I have a theory in that because gaming for many people is such a competitive activity, surely they're seeing some sense of their self-worth as a human being through the prism of their games, which means if their gaming world is challenged in some way, that becomes a personal attack.
I think it's also something that could be tied in with the idea that gamers have always seen themselves as like we're the cool little niche subset. Maybe it's a badge of honour, like I'm into something that no one else knows about. I'm into X indie film. You don't know this director like I know this director. They view themselves maybe also as kind of outcasts, and they found a community. And I don't want to label a whole group of people as like, oh, nerdy outcasts, but maybe there are some people involved in that have sort of identified with the community and gone, this is my brotherhood.
Now, there's some history to this, Mark, and it's actually in the late 70s, early 1980s marketing of personal computers. The Planet Money program on America's NPR put up a graph showing undergraduate admissions to American universities, and you go, hang on, where is he going with this? But in the 1960s, only between 5 and 15%, so I call it 10% of undergraduates were women in the 1960s because university was for men. Now, that grew during the 60s and 70s up to about 30% of admissions were women, and no matter what the course, that kept rising, and then suddenly in the early 80s it plummeted again, and it's back down to 20%. And the reason they suggested is that originally, to do computing science, everyone started on an even keel because the only computers were big mainframes. Then, when home computers came in, you started doing computing science, you were kind of expected to have at least been playing with a computer at home for years, except those home computers were marketed to boys. They were sold as technology and playthings for the home. All of the TV ads showed a teenage boy with a father. They had testimony from plenty of women who wanted to do computing science, but they were told by their lecturer, what do you mean you don't know this? Why are you doing computing science? Or, yes, we had a home computer, but it was in my brother's room and I had to ask permission to use. And this is exactly the market that Claire is talking about.
But it feels like, you know, we've come so far from that point now where...
And we have.
And that's so amazing, which is partly why I find Gamergate so frustrating, is that we have come so far, that there is such a diversity of people producing games, and also people having really in-depth conversation about how we represent genders, diversity in games, which is what Anita Sarkeesian, and I don't agree with every single point Anita Sarkeesian's ever made.
And that's the important thing. Like, you don't have to agree with everything. If there's a feminist critic, feminism isn't just one single idea and this one, you know, ethos that everyone...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Look, at the core of this, we do have a kind of male testosterone-fueled culture, not just marketed to males as, look, a first-person shooter is a natural thing to target to a young male, for a younger male.
Doesn't mean I don't love playing them and killing a lot of people with critical shots.
Absolutely. But whenever you get a group of men with no women around and lots of testosterone, you get a kind of behaviour that the psychologists have a technical name for it. It's called being an arsehole.
And also, I think, you know, when there's no criticism, when there's no dialogue, when any dialogue is shot down with death threats, rape threats, you know, threats to someone's individual safety, then I don't think you're actually having a critical dialogue at all. And that's what's happening here. It's you've got a group of people who are self-feeding on this kind of this hatred, and they're so angry.
This is what I want to get to. What I want to understand is why. Why have this probably quite small subsection of the wide, diverse gaming culture? Why has this loud minority taken it so personally?
I think it says that you've got a group of people that feel like any incursion on this sort of this crystal tower that they've set up for themselves, any incursion on that is a personal slight. So, but in what world would you say, oh, you don't watch Michael Bay films? I'm sorry, you're not a true film fan. I mean, that's the thing. They're targeting these small indie developed games, but AAA games have got their own issues. I mean, if you're looking for ethics in journalism, journos being flown around the world on these amazing junkets to go and try out a game, you know, it's probably going to result in a couple of good reviews. There's stories about that in journalism. You know, you ask the right people, you'll hear about them.
But that still persists.
That persists, and no one's questioning it. And I think that's another issue.
But they would argue, though, that actually, for lack of a better term, the more moderate end of the Gamergate spectrum, people that self-identify, they would argue that that is what this is about. picking through the entangled world between gaming journalism and gaming developers.
And you know what? It might still be about that, but you have to recognise that your movement, just like Occupy Wall Street got taken over by a few crazy nutjobs who were left-wing and loved sleeping out on the street for 2 weeks straight, your movement can be identified by a vocal minority. The other thing is you've got people that have taken over this argument because they're just closet misogynists and they're using it and saying, Gamergate, Gamergate, but it's a smokescreen for them just to push and peddle their own hatred, and that happens with a lot of political movements.
Well, it's interesting looking at the takedowns of Anita Sarkeesian. But just to give an example, like one of the examples that Anita Sarkeesian uses is there's a game where you're a male and you're going through and you're taking down a sex ring, and the guys argue that, well, there's no way that can be sexist because you're a guy taking down a sex ring. But of course, throughout the game, you only ever see women who subscribe to a certain body type. They're almost always naked with pert, anti-gravitational breasts. They never have any agency in the story. They oscillate between either being window dressing or a victim to be saved by a man. And how do they not connect that to the notion that that is entirely disempowering for women? How have they not made that connection?
I have one word for you, and I think it's privilege. And it's a hard word because self-identifying privilege is really difficult. You know, as a woman, I can see feminism, I can see misogyny, and I can see how over years and years there have just been small cultural things that leave women in a position of less power. But as a white person, I also have to recognise, like, geez, it's pretty bloody hard when you look at how white people have treated Indigenous people in this country, or I have to check that I have white privilege, and so it's hard when you hear someone saying, you know what, Asian minorities are really screwed over in this country, and you go, well, it's not my fault. And you very easily go, yeah, well, not all white people. And you're like, whoa, okay. You need to recognise that although you're not a jerk and you're not going out and killing people, that games and these grand narratives have been really positioned around, these tropes of, okay, the woman is the victim. Sure, you're helping her, but okay, they're all non-playable characters. You know, Assassin's Creed came into trouble because they were like, it's too hard to program a woman playable character.
But they had like dogs, running dogs, and a variety of dogs.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, you need to recognise that the fundamental narratives, people consume it without realising that there are kind of inherent problems in it.
In the 1970s, when that concept of multiculturalism happened, when women's rights went beyond the kind of militant style of the 60s and actually started to be incorporated into things like the public service for employment and so on, it took a concerted level at every level of society to change opinions. It took time. And
agitators and criticism of the likes of Anita Sarkeesian is important.
I think so. You don't necessarily,
the conversation going.
That's how it starts.
Yeah, you don't agree with everything she says, but she's got to be a forceful force to kind of knock down some walls.
So is she the kind of Germaine Greer of video gaming? I mean, in the same sense that Germaine Greer's writings in the 60s were the books that allowed women to go, hey, you're right, and they showed men, and men went, oh, yes, you're right, and we'll do something about that.
And some men took it as a personal affront because it cut them to their core.
And some women
as well.
You look at the way that they spoke about and wrote about, male journalists wrote about Germaine Greer in that era. It is, again, really quite
But we have what we have
language.
now, so much of what we have now, because there were the agitators early on, and I like to think that, in 10 years, if you want to be a young girl gamer, awesome. Like, hopefully we can kind of get all this muck out now. You know, as a young girl coming into gaming, there's a space for you. If you want to be a dev, if you want to be a gamer, if you want to just eat 2-minute noodles on your chair on the weekends and game while you play Borderlands. I don't do that. I totally do. But, you know, you can be that as well, and you don't have to even be... I mean, coming in today, I was kind of like, oh, do I even want to touch this? Do I even want to comment on this? Because immediately you open yourself up to a lot of bile. But I think hopefully this will burn out, will lance the wound, and it'll all just disappear.
Download This Show is what you are listening to. It is your guide to the sometimes complex world of technology, the internet and culture. We are in the studio with Claire Reilly, the news editor for CNet Australia, and Stilgherrian, whose work you can see in ZDNet, Crikey, and a host of other places. My name is Mark Fennell, and this time next year, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be seeing a lot of smartwatches